Hello there, my name's Phil Williams and I would like to welcome you to Audio Angling, the podcast site of fishingfilmsandfacts.co.uk. Most anglers will be familiar with the term Grand Slam, the targeted catching of 3 of the best species available in any given 24-hour period. The Americans are very big on this sort of thing, and to be fair to them, there is a definite level of achievement there, depending of course on the 3 species you choose to target. A Colwyn Bay Grand Slam, for example, of a dogfish, a whiting and a dab, is hardly going to have people flocking across the border into Wales. Not even the prospect of a Super Slam, by catching all 3 of them on the same trace and at the same time. But Tarpon, Bonefish and Permit, now that's another matter, and the one most widely recognised by Grand Slam enthusiasts on the shallow water inshore sport fishing scene. In part because it is a genuine challenge. Certainly because these are 3 major sport fishing species, but equally because it is realistically achievable, though probably never easy, from a small boat with a limited operating range. Each of these fish demand immediate respect in their own right, but fishing for them as individuals, where either numbers or size is often the main objective, is a very different proposition to catching them all on the same day, when they then become urgent target names just to be ticked off a list. With me is Graeme Pullen, who over the years has devoted a great deal of his time to all 3 species. So what is it then about this particular 3-fish combination that makes it so very special?
I mean, a lot of fish in warm water in the tropics do actually fight harder than all the stuff we're going to catch in British and European waters. I guess that's just a water temperature thing. Of the 3, the bonefish, the tarpon and the permit, I suppose, history has it that the fastest swimming fish in the flat water and the skinny water as it's known is the bonefish. But in fact, if you hook a tarpon in comparatively shallow water, say 3 feet or less, it does the same thing. It's still a hard running, long fighting fish, on heavier tackle. So it's all purely relative. Again, with the permit, you can catch them on light tackle, you can catch them on medium tackle, but they do still run as far as a bonefish goes. But, if you take let's look at the bonefish first. They are the skinny water, they're a missile, they're a bullet, an amazing fish. A bit like a mullet as far as spookiness to catch. You can catch them really easily. On the other hand, they can be an absolute nightmare. If they're not switched on that day, it doesn't matter what you throw at them, and it does have to be a careful cast in all situations. You're not going to catch them. The first bonefish I caught, I don't like to say it, but it was about 1979 in Bermuda. That fish was about 5 pounds. I had several trips over to Bermuda, fishing with a guy who was a fisheries officer over there called Pete Perrenchief. And I just remember that trip. I caught loads of coarse fish over here, and pike and bits and bobs and all the barbel and chub and stuff like that. So I thought I knew a thing about fighting powers of fish. Well, the first thing we did was to do a test on the fishing rod I had, which is just a standard 8-foot spinning rod, fixed ball reel, 6-pound line, which I remember had 6-pound line on it, probably about 4 years old knowing me. But Pete took me over and he said, go across there about 30 yards, he said, and I'll take your line in the other hand and just see how much you can bend that fishing rod. And he said, I'll put it on a spring balance. So I put a good bend in this rod of what I thought was a good bend. I'll never forget this. It was about £1 to £1.3, something like that, £1.2, £1.3 ounces. So he said, it's not really enough to fight a bonefish properly, Graeme. You're just going to get the spool emptied. So we changed positions. He took the spring balance. He said, now tell me what you recalled on this rod. It's my same rod. He said, if I break the rod, I'll pay for it. So you couldn't be fairer than that. This is a light tackle expert, a full, IGFA class light tackle expert. And he pulled just under 4 pounds with it. I couldn't believe it. And after that, it was a turning point for me. I used to go fishing with him for bonefish and use small lures called a wiggle jig, which I remember, tiny little rubber shrimpy thing. And I actually went on my own the following year out to Bermuda. I caught maybe 3 or 4 with Pete, me about 5 pounds, which was a good scrapping fish. But I went out on my own with a wife and had a holiday out in Bermuda. And I remember fishing a public beach over there. And I actually, cast one out and caught one all on my own. And that's the only bonefish I've really brought back at it in a case. That was 7 pounds, 1.5 ounces in Bermuda, which is very good bone fishing. The largest bonefish I've had in Bermuda, again on a wiggle jig, was called, it was a 9-pounder, which again I caught on my own, so I was dead chuffed with that one. Moving on from there, I progressed, which was a big, huge stepping stone, was to the Florida Keys. Must have had about 2 trips to the Florida Keys. Not great fishing, because you used to read about what was caught there in the late 70s. And prior to that, obviously, I was over in the late 70s. And I met up with a guy at Bub and Mary's Marina called Richard Stanczyk, who was actually a professional guide. And he guided, if this makes sense, one of Florida's top guides to the world record bonefish on a fly. So that's how good he was. The guides chartered him as a guide. And that fish was up around 14 pound 3 or 14 pound 6 on a 12 pound fly tippet. I believe it's still the current world record there. As soon as I met Richard, things turned around big time. The first afternoon I went out with a friend. I spotted a bonefish, cast a shrimp at it, and got that. That was about 7.5, and he obviously realised I'd done a bit of bone fishing. And on other trips I've been out with him, mostly fishing shrimp in the shallow water for what's called tailing bonefish, where you see the tail sticking up out of the water in about 6 or 8 inches. You're looking for the wake of a moving fish. As it moves through shallow water, it breaks up the regular wave pattern, put a slight disturbance. You can actually see where they are. We had 7 in one evening, which is sort of outlandish bone fishing. And from bait fishing, which I thoroughly enjoyed, Richard obviously moved me across onto fly fishing for bonefish, which was, excuse the pun, a whole different kettle of fish. You've got to present the fly to them very, very delicately. It's got to be put within about 3 feet of them. You might have a crosswind, you might have a bit of tide. You got, everything sort of seems to be working against you. Every time I go fly fishing, it's never working right. But the best fly fishing day I've had, ironically, because I like fishing on my own, was on an expedition with Chris Dawn. I think it was a features editor of Angling Times and other publications. And we went on a press trip out to Bahamas. And we'd been with a guide and we caught, wait for this, nothing. We caught no bonefish at all. So not very happy. I got up at dawn one morning because I thought I'd seen bonefish around in front of the hotel, as stupid as it sounds. And it was very, very cloudy day. I can always remember it. And I was hooking fish out the front. They're not big fish, like 2 pounds or so, up to about 4 pounds. And I actually finished with 12 bonefish on a fly rod before we left at 12 o'clock to get the plane back to Florida. So that was the most outlandish, weird day with no guide or anything, just totally blind stripping, and just before the storm, which I understand the weather like that can turn them on. The largest I personally had, I've never broken 12 pounds, just under 12 pounds. But the most incredible catch I had was again with Richard on a fly. He used to take me out in the evenings. We actually had a double header of 11 pounders, which are, pretty huge fish, on a fly rod. So, and you've seen a bonefish really smoke off about 100 to 125 yards of hot fly line going through your rod rings and fingers. You have to realise just how lucky we were to get those 2 fish. And obviously they're not killed. They're both brought in and netted, photographed and released. As to the biggest I've ever seen, again, Florida Keys, Isla Morada. If you look in the IGFA books, most of the world records come from the Isla Morada area. One day I was just sitting around chilling as you do, waiting to go out fishing. Richard said, you better go over to the bait tank. And I had seen a crowd over there. He said, guys come in with his guide. They brought it in the back of the boat. Caught one, I think it was on shrimp. Really, really monster bonefish. And they were keeping it alive in the Richard's live bait tank, just to get it officially weighed. And that fish was gargantuan across the head. I can always remember it. I got pictures. I got a couple of slide pictures. 15 pounds, 6 ounces. So that was absolutely enormous. Now, if you wanted to go bone fishing, I'd say for numbers, if you just want to catch fish, you cannot beat the Bahamas. This is bait, this is shrimp, this is jigs. If you just want to go and experience the incredible power of a bonefish, the Bahamas, without a doubt, is the place to go. However, there's a couple of other places. Christmas Island's worth mentioning. And there's some, I say they're new atolls. They've obviously always been there, but they've recently been opened up for fishing, and that's in the Seychelles. To the south of the Seychelles, I've caught bonefish and got it on video as well from one of the atolls there called De Roche. Well, even further south from that, I think 200 or 300 miles further south, there's a group of atolls that are getting some big numbers and quite big fish from there. So they are all over the place, but they're a shallow water fish. The world record, far as I recall, was caught from Zululand in Africa, fishing excess of 20 pounds. So I mean an absolute monster. I think there's actually some subspecies of bonefish around as well. The ones I caught in the Seychelles, they look sort of very thin. They just didn't look like the Florida fish. Maybe it was the feed. I don't know, but I just got the feeling that there were sort of subspecies of bonefish. Florida Keys, you will get probably more big bonefish than anywhere. And obviously you've got all the guides that you want there. You can either go doing it yourself. I've even caught them leaning rods up against bed chairs, casting shrimps out from the front of hotels there as well. So they come close to shore in that shallow water. You just got to be very careful, very quiet, have the right tackle, have your drag set so they can take line. But this is the thing, folks, they've got to take line under a lot of pressure. You cannot afford to have the spool backed off on the drag line because they're just empty. I mean, I've had to jump in from a skiff and swim after a fish. Got that all on video as well. And it's spooled the reel. I'm still swimming and it's still dumped me and popped the line. So they are an absolutely fantastic species. And yes, they do have a cult status, no question of that. Quite rightly so. If you get the chance to catch one, my advice, absolutely, you've got to take it.
So what would you recommend in terms of specific tackle and tactics?
Well, there's a sort of variety. I suppose to say there's a variety. There's 3 basic ways I'd suggest you go for bonefish. If you can't get back, you can use jigs. Small ones called a Phillips wiggle jig. But basically any tiny little lead-headed jig with a rubber tail or some tassel behind it. Brown is a very good colour. And you use a fixed spool reel. Make sure it's a deep spool one. It's got at least spool 300 yards, at least 300 metres of, say, 8 to 12 pound line. I wouldn't go sort of 4 and 6s on bonefish, even for like a 5 pound bonefish, because they really do uncork on the hook up. They're gone, 8-foot spinning rod, 9-foot spinning rod. That's about the average size. You can buy lots of them in America. You can get them in the supermarkets over there, little outfits. For the jigs, the most important thing is, I find, is tying what I call a loop knot, which, you guys can look up on a knot tying thing on Google and find out. It's a loop knot. It's basically so that the lure is not tight to your knot. Your knot is loose and the jig can swivel and wobble around and give the lure plenty of action. For bait fishing, there's 2 sort of baits I use really. In the Bahamas I use conch, which is spelt C-O-N-C-H, so it looks like conch, but it's called conch. And it's, a giant shellfish that they break open, split open and use the meat inside. And the bonefish absolutely go nuts for this. In Florida, they're using live shrimp and they swear you must have live shrimp. Well, trust me, I've caught them on frozen shrimp and fresh frozen shrimp as well. They just like shrimp. And by the time you skewer something like, say, a 3/0 bait holder hook through a live shrimp, trust me, it's not too live anymore. Again, I'd set the drag fairly tight so you can wrap your hand around it and pull it off under pressure. You want a good bit of drag on there. Fly fishing is people like to think that's a cult way of fishing for bonefish, and perhaps they think they're a superior being by catching them on a fly. No, you're just making life more interesting for yourself and putting the odds in the fish's favour as well. So if you think you're a better angler, fine. It's just a different way of catching the bonefish. Benefit of fly fishing is you've got a small fly. You can drop the fly closer to a shallow water bonefish and it doesn't make such a big plip. So you can actually put a fly much closer to a bonefish and not spook it than you could do with bait. Fly lines, you've got to make sure that you do get, well, they call them a bonefish taper for bonefish, makes no difference really. It's a forward taper. But what you do want to make sure you get about at least a 9 weight, a weight forward 9 weight, because you got to punch into wind as well. That's the other thing you got to watch about. Must be floating so that you can actually lift it off and, do a recast. If you screw up on the first cast or the bonefish doesn't take it, you might get 3 shots maximum each bonefish, before they'll either spook, see the boat, or they're gone. Again, I use a 9-foot leader tapered down. Might use 15 pounds straight off with a nail knot to the fly line, say 3 feet of that, and I might use another 6, perhaps 7 feet of whatever tippet I want to use, say 8 pound tippet, something like that. Loop knot again to the fly. Huge number of flies. The most popular or famous one was called a Crazy Charlie, which is just a double bead headed eye. My favourite was when I caught those at 12 in the morning was on a fly called a Mona's, that's M-O-A-N-A', Mona's or Moana chili pepper. That was deadly, and I've since had quite a few other bonefish on that as well. Now reels, that's a bit important. You can use your trout reel. If you get anything over about 8-9 pounds, you're probably going to lose it, I'll be honest. And if you go anywhere near the revolving drum handles, you're going to lose a knuckle or get a nail ripped off, and then it's back to nails or rust to get your nails painted because it's painful. So you want what's called, I call them the direct drive reels that give you the problems there. You want ones with a centre drag, whereby the centre drag's whistling around, taking all the drags going on the fish, and you can adjust that drag. But the handle, the actual knob of the handle, is not whizzing around, stopping you grab it. Because when they go, it's almost, if you try to stop them, you can use 15 pound line or say an 8 pound, and he's going to break it on 8-9 pound bonefish, will pop it. So you have to let them run. The other thing you must do with a fly rod is, if you hook up, say for argument's sake, you've cast I don't know, 20 yards to the fish, which is quite a long way from bonefish. You've cast 20 yards, you start stripping in, here he comes, oh my God, he's close to the boat, he's, 15 feet, he's 10 feet, he's 6 feet, bang, you hook up. When you hook up, you must clear that fly line that's all around your feet. Make sure it's not around any bits sticking up on the boat if you're in a boat, or bits of rock or anything if you're fishing off the shore. They can cut the fly line quickly, and release it very, very lightly. Don't let that initial surge with a fly rod, don't try and power that fish at all. One, you're going to burn your fingers holding too much pressure on the fly line. And second, once you've cleared that, you're going to be going onto your backing, which is fine. But what you do is you just lightly palm the spool of the reel, or if you use a center drag, you just get all the drag pressure comes from the little knob that you put the preset tension on. So that's basically it. 9-weight outfits, no more than half a dozen flies. Brown would be my favourite. Brown stroke orange is my favourite colour. And you should pretty well be set up for a chance at a bonefish. Tarpon, I'm really on a buzz with those at the moment, having recently just come back from Florida. I used to go like 2-3 times a year to Florida, different times, and I seem to have somehow got more and more and more into the tarpon fishing. Yeah, they're called the Silver King. They rightly say they have an incredible mouth on them. It's just a big underslung chin they've got, and they just open their gills and mouth quickly and suck huge baits back, just in a flash. So they're almost got no teeth. They're like what I call a suction engulfing type feeder. They grow very, very big. They're huge silver scales all over them. What can I say? They're just, if you get the chance to fish for them, they're almost in a contrast to bonefish, which is an incredibly fast running fish on lightweight tackle. The tarpon can do pretty much the same thing, and it leaps out all over the water on sort of medium to heavy tackle. The downside is that mouth. Unfortunately, it's going to work against you. You're going to lose fish. You possibly reckon on a say a 4-to-1 strike rate. In other words, you're going to get maybe 4 bites, where you might get 2 hookups out of that, and you might get 1 to the boat for release. So 4 bites for 1 fish would still be pretty good. I mean, I've actually increased that myself, and I'll possibly say if we went out at the right time on the right evening, 2-to-1. No one can ever say with tarpon, I'm going to catch every fish I catch, because I'm telling you, man, that does not happen. Even if you're a professional guide, I just don't believe them. But they, about 8 years ago, I think it was, they came out with this hook, Owners, O-W-N-E-R, I think it is. And it had like a flattened point to it, and it was unbelievable. It was like a chemically etched or chemically sharpened point on it. And there's no question. It's a nice sort of wide gape for live baits for crab fishing. And since I've used those, or all the guides will tell you this as well, they're really, really increasing the, the strike rate on tarpon. Now, they're a big fish, and you're going to be fishing, say, small lever drag reels for them, or these giant, like a Penn 58, 850 SS, those 750 SS sizes, sort of heavy duty saltwater reel for them. They're a big fish. If I could give you an average, say, around somewhere like the top spots, like the Florida Keys, you'd say 80, 110, that's the sort of, average fish that you're going to catch there throughout their summer months. You can catch them on what you would call a regular British 30-pound boat outfit. 20-pound boat rods, 30-pound boat rods. Don't really fancy 20-pound line. I've done it, but you just take longer getting the fish. I'd say 30 minimum, 50 pounds, is better. But that brings me into the second point about how I think I've increased my own hookup and putting the fish in the boat or up to the boat, is because they had such a hard mouth. I used to fish harder and heavier drags. I guess a lot of people have gone this route as well. And, you're damn near locking the reel up. Well, when you get the take off a 100, 120 pounder, there's a lot of pressure there. And I can assure you we will absolutely blister out 50-pound line against full drag. You can put your thumb on there, you'll burn your thumb. But what I found I was doing, I thought I was driving the hook in harder, you see. And I'd be banging away on this bloody fish and nearly going over the side, the stretches coming out the line. And the fish would leap and jump because I'm basically restricting it to such an extent that I'm turning it round, it's facing me, and then it goes apeshit at the boat, or head facing towards me, the hook pings out. Well, then they started doing blue marlin fishing. It was a sort of fad or a craze, just fishing single hooks, rigid, on a rigid rig they called it, with a piece of wire. And instead of fishing a standard strike drag for that on the marlin reels, they started coming way, way back on the drag, because they're trolling these lures behind the boat. And as the boat goes along, the marlin comes up, grabs the lure, it turns to go down and away, and only then does the crewman run up and gradually, slowly increase the lever drag pressure, up to sort of the strike drag, and they might not put this up for about 5 to 6 seconds, so the fish is actually turned and it's just being, the point of the hook is just barely held, and they want to let the fish turn away from the boat and then increase the drag and whack, it goes on full tight and it pulls it into the hinge of the mouth. And I got to thinking about this. I thought this might work for the tarpon that I keep losing. I was catching tarpon, obviously, but like a lot of people, I was losing them. I thought there must be a reason for this. So coupled to the owner hooks, I started backing my drag way off, just so it didn't overrun. I had a light drag on, let's say a couple of pounds of pressure, that's all. Left the ratchet on, and I'm telling you, way up my strike to conversion rate went. Well, up to what it is pretty much now, so almost halved it, say 2 to 1. Every second bust I expect to get a really good hook up. And what was happening was, if a tarpon takes a bait or anything, it's coming towards you, you can't help that. It's going to start jumping and you sort of slack line, you can't help it. You're probably going to lose that fish. But if they hit from the side or they hit sort of head on and you're going, or they're taking it away from you, they're pulling into the line and into the rod, then that light drag just wears that hook in throughout the fight. I still go to strike drag after the hook up, but I let them have 4 or 5 seconds of pouring line out under light pressure. And also, when they start jumping, I've dumped about 30 to 50 yards of line in the water. So when they jump, the belly of line in the water is actually helping to hold that hook in. And that's honestly how I think the hook up rate goes. Now you can catch your tarpon. You can catch them off the shore. You can catch them off bridges. You can do inshore trolling for them. So, actually in a sort of big game boat, you can go trolling. Or you can do what we do, which is fishing for small boats in the channel. So let's just try and sort of give this a bit of a breakdown. Generally, off the shore, you're going to have to find river mouth areas, lagoons, quiet areas, somewhere where there's some bait going in around boats where they're chopping up bait and chucking it in. And I used to get this around the Isle of Marada area. There's lots of places you could fish around the bridges at night. I used to fish off the bridges, and the first experience I had with the tarpon took me about 3 nights. It was just with a load of other guys leaning over in the moonlight, dabbling it was like a sardine or something up and down in the water, jiggling it up and down, slapping it on the surface. And I got a hook up of about 25 pounder. And I lost the fish, went around the bridge stanchion, but that was it. It showed they would actually take a bait at night off the shore. Then I started reading about some chumming that they were doing. I think it was up in Miami. I think it was a guy called, if I can recall, I think his guy's called Bouncer Smith, used to fish out of Miami. I did fish with him much for hammerheads. And he used to specialise in chumming with bits of carcass and stuff like that. So I used to go down one of the docks and climb aboard one of the bows of a 60-foot boat, because I could see down in the spotlights in the water where the tarpon were, and I'd chum them up with cubes of rubbish bait, and I did really good. And one night I had one about 25 pounds, and I got another one about, I think it was about 110 pounds. Woke everybody up in the marina at about 1:30 in the morning, and they managed to chin gaff it, and we dragged it out. And I got photographs of it, it's like 6-7 feet long. So you can get some very, very big fish from the shore. You can catch them on lures, but good chance of losing them, because you've got, say, a treble hook. That means you've got 3 hooks to pull into the fish as opposed to 1. So they can often work against each other. These don't really like the treble hooks. I'd sooner fish a single hook on a lure. Or you can go what you call it inshore trolling. They specialise in this, like in Key West, where the water's deeper, and they go out at night, which I still find weird. That these fish are actually taking plugs in pitch black darkness. And we used to fish with like a lead core line down there, I think it was, and a great big Rapala, sort of CD18 size Magnum. And the biggest fish I've had, in fact, it was my first tarpon down there. I've got a picture of it behind me. That was about 112 pounds, I think. At that stage, it was one we brought in. Obviously, tarpon are not a good eating fish. You don't need to bring them in. They're a great sport fish, and really just catch them and get your photograph and let them go. So you can catch them at night with lures. Without a shadow of a doubt, bait fishing is the best, and that brings me on to the cream of the tarpon fishing down the Florida Keys area, which is fishing from small boats with a guide. We've done it on our own out in boats with a guide, and what you're doing is you're either anchoring or drifting the channels between the flats there at varying states of tide, using a float fish, either a live pinfish, which you've caught previously, which would be like a tiny black bream, I would say, for English guys, a mullet, which would be about 6 to 8 inches long. They get 2 runs, the general big mullet, and then they get what's called the silver mullet run, which is in June, of a smaller species, and that's a pretty good one to go on, because the tarpon really home in on these schools of mullet, and you can hear them busting at night and generally crunching everything down. With the mullet fishing, because they're a 6 or 8 inch fish, if you're holding the rod, you can actually feel getting what they call a nervous bait, a nervous mullet. It's supported about 6 feet away, from a big cork, so it's not going to go down in the weeds or go on the bottom, and it's chugging away, swimming around. The tarpon sees it, he starts to wheel towards it, and you get this huge banging and thumping on the line, and it's most peculiar. And the next thing you know, the water explodes and there's a 6-foot silverfish leaping out with your mullet in its jaws.
That, quite literally, is how I caught my best ever tarpon of 160 pounds off Isla Morada. Though as you mentioned earlier, I've also had them trolling close in after dark off Key West.
The other way you can do it is what's called a blue claw crab, which is, trust me, you don't want to get nipped by a blue claw crab because they really can draw blood. But when you buy them from the bait shops, along the tackle shops and stuff like that in the Keys, they're already declawed, if you like. They just push their thumb onto the knuckle of it and it pops off the claw, so they're perfectly handy to get on. One thing I would say is you just make sure you hook them just to the outside of the edge of the carapace of the shell, just enough to get a hook hold. And my tip is, don't use your chemically sharpened owner hook to try and wiggle them backwards and forwards to make that hole, because you're going to blunt it. Use an old second hook that you've sharpened up, a loose one, not tied to anything. Make the hole initially with that to get the first point of the owner through, and then wiggle the owner through so you're not actually damaging that point on the hook. That's those three. Finally, you've got fly fishing for them. Now, I've caught them on a fly. The biggest I lost actually was about 90 pounds. I can tell you, was it worth it? I have to say no. It was like 3 days standing on a bow of a flats boat, staring into the oblivion, frying my brains out, waiting for a 6-foot shadow to come along. You get the fly to it in a matter of seconds. All I can remember is strip, strip, strip all the time. The next thing I remember is 150 yards of fly line's gone and everything's gone to doo-doo. You've lost the fish. And that was the excitement. I've obviously caught them there, 15, 20, 30, that sort of size. That's brilliant size for fly fishing. 10-pounders are ideal on an English outfit. They just use big dress flies, like a big streamer fly. It's not rocket science. You try and spot the fish or an area the fish are known to be rolling in. You cast a fly out, big, heavy 12-weight fly outfit. Could be a sink tip or a floating line, certainly not a sinking line. Again, fly reels must be anti-reverse. You want to keep well away from the knuckle wrapping of the handles. And stripping, as they call it in the States, was, well, we probably made a bit of a cock up to start with on the first few trips doing it. My strip is, really whacking the fly in about 2 feet long pools. Their stripping is just barely moving the fly. They actually mean 3 or 4 inches, which is trouting to us. So when they go strip, 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 they mean 3 inch, 3 inch, 3 inch, and we're going 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet, and we're just taking the bloody fly away from the tarpon. It's a good fight, there's no question about it. And, I've got no sour grapes because I haven't had a 150 pounder on a fly rod. I've not really bothered whether I do or not. I've had fished 160 pounds on a light bait rod. Even this last year, I had one with my son, about 140 pounds. Got it in the boat, photographed it. I'm quite happy to fish. In fact, I am happier fishing, say, 50-pound line on a 20 or 30-pound rod, so I'm overlining the rod. I get a brilliant scrap, but less chance of busting off. I mean, there's enough trouble with the hooks falling out of these guys. The last thing I want to do is fish a light line, spend all that money travelling to the Keys, or wherever it is in the world, busting the fish off. If you want the absolute pinnacle of fish, it's over in Gabon in West Africa, in the, I guess it's the Gabon River there. Average fish, close to 200 pounds. I know of one English guy, I think he had one 280 pounds, just standing on a sandbar in the river, lobbing out like a 2-pound bait by hand on a 50-pound boat rod, and he still lost fish. So they're an incredible fighting fish. And again, if you get the chance to go for them, you've got to do it. But watch out, guys, because you do get hooked on it yourself as well. Yeah, the third of the shallow, skinny water fighters, probably almost the most difficult one to catch, I think, really, is the permit, which is I suppose, well, I say it's like it is a species of jack, but if you don't know what a jack is, it's tough, but it's a big, I know what it is. It's a laterally compressed fish with a brown snub nose and a deep V tail. I think that's what they call it, lateral compression. So, a bit like a freshwater bream, as it were, but trust me, if a bream went through the water at the speed a permit does, bits will fly off it, they have fins all over the surface. The permit is a strong, fast, dogged fighter that is almost considered the ultimate colt fish to catch on a fly rod. In fact, I know it is. I know permit on a fly used to be limited to something like 100 people in history has only ever caught a permit on a fly. It's a lot more than that now, obviously, because saltwater fly fishing's progressed to so many people in popularity. My own experience with them is, is nothing like the bonefish and tarpon. I'm going to say I'm any expert on permit. I caught them to about, I don't know, 34, 35 pounds. Caught them on my own. Gone out in rental boats and caught them, but not big numbers. You know, I don't believe there's actually I think it's a permit expert. You know, there's people that understand the ways to catch them and the wares, but when it comes to fly fishing for them, they really are tricky. There's almost not an expert for them. So my initiation, into permit fishing was on a trip. I used to go to the Cayman Islands quite a lot, and we fished little cayman. We were doing a bonefish story, and we wanted to get a permit on a fly for a magazine. Had the editor with me, Chris Thorne, and we've been flogging away with a guide at the top end of Little Cayman where these permit came in. Not huge fish, I don't know, 5 pound, 8 pounds, you know, but on a regular trout outfit, which is what the story demanded we call them on, it would have been, a real worm burner to get that line going across the flats. But it just wasn't going to happen. You know, you wade out and wade out and wade out, and then you try and position yourself. The guide's telling you which way to cast. And the only time you see them feed is when you see that top of the upper lobe of their forked tail come out the surface is when they tip their head down. You can't actually feel much when they pull. You know, it's very, very tricky on a fly to catch them. Anyway, we didn't get any on there, and I asked the guy, I really, really want to catch one of those permits. So he said, sure, we'll do it in like a flash on bait. And he just started digging in the sand with his hands, reached down about right up to his armpit, pulled this crab out. I think he broke the legs off it or something constructive like that. Put it on a hook on a spinning rod, like a bonefish rod, which, because I say we did want to do some bone fishing. Waded out with him, and the editor sat on the shore, not too happy if I was going to hook or not. I wasn't sure what he was going to feel. First cast, first permit, he just ate it out of sight. Because let's face it, folks, that's what they eat. They eat crabs, they don't eat flies. It's only people that are making it difficult for themselves by tying flies on the end. If you want to catch a permit, their primary food source is crabs. You know, they go around grabbing out crabs and crunching them up. So it shows you that go with bait if you do want one. On the flats in places like the Florida Keys, which is my experience of them, yeah, they are very hard to catch. You can catch them, but it's finding the fish is difficult. You know, they're almost nomadic. They don't necessarily turn up in certain areas at certain times. They can be anywhere. They just sort of pop out of the seagrasses there, and you think it's a bonefish tail, and it turns into a permit. And they are very, very ultra spooky in the shallow water. It's almost like their nerves are jangling. So you've got to get that fly, which is invariably a crab pattern, you know, in brown, or a shrimp pattern in brown. You've got to get that fly right in front of their faces without spooking them. They're possibly a bit less aggressive than a bonefish on the fly. When they do want it, they're still sort of picky. Whereas a bonefish, when you give him and he does want it, you can barely strip the fly away from him. So you can get them on the flats, on the fly rods. My personal preference is use shrimp or crab. They call them live baits, but you skew them on the hook. Maybe the crab, if you nick it through the edge of the shell, the legs are still going. You can fish it as a dead bait, as they did in the Cayman Islands. Pull the legs off, you get some smell in the water that way, or you can do it as a visual crab. In other words, don't damage it, just cast it out as a crab. So if you want a permit, crabs are the way to go. Rental boats, I did catch one once while we were bone fishing on shrimp, what we call stake-up fishing, which is anchoring the boat generally with a push pole. You do it on an anchor, it's too noisy, in maybe 3 feet of water, something like that. Waist deep water, no more than 4 feet of water, certainly. 6 spinning rods, 10, 12 pound line, fixed ball reels, 8 foot long, rods, tiny egg sinker. I think it's an 1/8 of an ounce egg sinker onto the hook, bait up with shrimp. And then when the bonefish, picks up the shrimp, it actually picks the lead weight up at the same time. And you get a run that's not snagging on the bottom. Otherwise, if you can imagine the lead was, say, 3 feet away from the hook as per normal running ledger rig. As the bonefish is moving along with the bait, he's bumping that lead along the bottom. It's going to snag in a piece of coral. He feels the drag, spits it out, or worse, you get snagged up properly and bust off. But we were fishing away there, and I had what we thought was a world record bonefish hooked up. It took 20 minutes at least, battling this big permit to get it to the boat. I got it to the boat, and I put it in the live well because I figured the owner, Richard Stanzik, there's no way he's ever going to believe I've caught a permit in his live well, because everybody says you must have a guide to catch a permit. And we went back in, put in the live well, raced the boat back in, got it weighed officially at Bub Mary's. It was 17 pounds. So a nice permit on a sort of 12 pound spinning rod outfit, and released it there and then. That's my claim to fame. However, with a permit, you get You get fish through the winter down, well, the Marquesas, which is a group of islands down in Key West or off Key West, quite a way down from off Key West, but the guide boats run out there. The flats down there in the winter, for some reason, do get good runs of permit. Not the real giant ones, fish, I guess up to about 20 pounds, 10 to 20 pounds. And I fly fish for those. I haven't got any, but it is the place to go if you want to catch one on a fly rod. If you've absolutely got to do it, go down there. You can use standard bonefish outfits for them, fly rods. You don't need the Tarpon 12 weights. You can use a 9 weight outfit. It's really basically exactly the same as a bonefish, but the fly is the important thing. It needs to be a big shrimp pattern in brown, or it needs to be a crab pattern. That's my opinion. Now, those fish that are feeding on the flats, eventually through the spring months in the Keys, they will start to migrate offshore. They're going to start running out to the reefs and the wrecks. And there's several wrecks that have been blown up as dive sites in the wrecks, and they've been inhabited by these permit. Now, nobody really knows whether they spawn on or over the wrecks, or they just station themselves over these wrecks before they go on to spawn elsewhere, say deeper in the reef or deep in the water. But you can definitely catch a monster permit, trust me, by going out to these wrecks. You generally would go out with a big game boat, or you don't need it, so you could do a half-day trip. You want to go midday when the sun's high, and you go out to these wrecks in about 150 feet of water, something like that, 90 feet of water, not too deep. It's on the edge of the reef, and the guy goes up in the captain goes up in the top of the flying bridge, in the tuna tower, in fact, not the flying bridge, right at the top, so he can get the best access seeing through the water, the least glare. And he's going to be looking for where these schools of permit are feeding in amongst the small tunas and skipjacks and stuff like that. Down on the deck, you're just told instructions. You either do it yourself or you get the crewman to do it for you. You're just fishing with crab. That's all you fish with. And just make a hook in the side, pretty much like I mentioned for the tarpon. Make a hook hole with an old hook. Don't use the one you're actually going to have on the fishing line, because you can blunt it, just take the edge off it. Free line is the best way. Pretty big crab, we call them medium-sized crabs. I mean, I can't measure it, so 2 inches across would be 2.5 inches across would be a good casting size. You cast out with a fixed spool reel, good drag, saltwater series reels, got a good smooth drag, generally minimum 30 pound line, which does seem a bit overkill, but these fish generally would start at about 20 pounds. I would say they start at 20 pounds. And even this last summer, I went out with my son and some friends, and we caught some, and I got the job of crewing the boat. The decky wouldn't turn up, and the captain said, well, I'll take you out, but you've got to do all the baiting and casting. Well, that's like manna from heaven for me. And we went out, we caught some, and basically he sight casts. I sight cast in, and he's spotting them. And he lets it sink, and the permit will flash on its side. And the skipper's looking for this flash of silver. And that's when he tells you, lock up or just wind. So he sees the take. You rarely feel it to actually take the bait. And you just crank until you can't turn the handle anymore. And then it's just an immense hanging on crash dive to stop it getting into the wreck. Now, this year we had one. Well, even I've never seen it. All the years I was going there, professional photographers out with us, and I don't think he'd had a permit. We got him one permit. I hooked it up, gave him the rod. Fish was about 25 pounds, something like that. And we used the last giant crab of the day because the light was fading. The skipper couldn't see the permit, so he said just put the heaviest crab on. And we used a small jig as well to give it a little bit of weight to try and sink it. And it sunk out of sight, and the skipper says, no good, why? He said, I can't see it anymore. And I said, I'm sure I felt a bump on the line. He said, well, just let it sit there. This crab was virtually dead. And yeah, sure enough, I got a tape, wound down, and it was obviously at the bottom of the school, which we assume would be a bigger fish. Gave him the rod. Well, I can assure you, he didn't even get one turn on the handle. If he had a video camera there, you had the most, just immense blistering take in one run. It took possibly, we gunned the boat, the big game boat, 40-footer, to get it away from the wreck, put pressure on it. Yeah, both hands on the rod, giant Pen 850 SS, saltwater series reel, full drag on, 30-pound line, stripped it, I tell you, to the bone, and the line exploded at the bottom end of the spool. Size of the fish, the skipper put at 50 pounds. Now that's what permit's like, and although they're tough on a fly, if you say to me, Graeme, which one do you want to catch? Do you want to catch a 15-pound on a fly rod, or you want the chance of a 50 on a heavier gear? Yeah, trust me, the 50 on the heavy gear is going to get the vote every time. Really, when you think about it, The tarpon we talked about, the bonefish we talked about, I know I've definitely mentioned pretty simple basic rigs. You know, like we fish in the UK, we have clement spoons, flying booms, bits of brass, nuts, bolts, everything, you know, plastic beads, spinners, spoons. Oh yeah, and the bait, you know, it's almost an afterthought. For the better fishing, it's just seemed to be the harder fish, you know, the tougher fish to catch. You don't need all that gadgetry, as it were, I suppose you'd call it. When I think about it, you know, the bonefish and the permit and the tarpon, it's just almost a hook and a bait, you know. The subsidiary stuff is maybe with the tarpon is a cork. A bonefish, you might have a tiny little egg sinker, nothing else, that's it. Permit, nothing, it's a hook. It would generally be, that owner pattern's good again. I really do like those owner hooks. 6 or 8 hooks. They must be sharp, must be strong. No need for a leader. You don't need a leader. Some of them do actually use leaders. I can tell you why later in the day and later in the year when the fish do get a bit hammered, they use fluorocarbon, tie on a 4 foot length of a fluorocarbon leader. But, you know, that's at the back end of the season when the fish have barely been under the cosh from all the different boats over these wrecks. As a general opinion would be 30-pound line, regular mono, no braid. They won't use braid on these big fish. Any fast running fish, they're not into braid at all. You just tear the hook out, they'll bust it. You know, they don't need the bite detection because those 3 species you're going to catch on the shallow waters are all very, very close to you. So braids are no. Mono's good because that stretch factor they got 10% or so is actually working in your favour. So yeah, for permit, it's really nothing more than a hook.
Okay, so we've looked individually at the 3 species that go to make up this particular Grand Slam in terms of location, tactics and bait. But that's when you don't have to catch one species, then rush around like a madman looking for the other 2. The pressure then is really on, and your approach to each must presumably change because then it's a race against time. So with that in mind, what would you say is the best way of quickly catching one of each species, regardless of size, to complete this specific objective?
Well, as I'm looking at, I've not yet done it yet, and I've had sort of the 2 out of the 3 in various mixes, but I've never done the 3 out of the 3. And, you know, it's not high on my list of priorities. I'm not bothered because they do fantasy slams. If I think is have them on 3 on a fly rod, and, you know, you can do another slam, you can get them on baitfish rods, and I mean, it just goes on and on. But if you do really want to go for, let's say, the Grand Slam of that species, there would be a definite specific time that would give you a really, really good shot at it. You know, I mean, if somebody said, Graeme, I've got to do it, can you take me out to do it? I'd say, right, we're going to go in June. You go in early June, which is a crossover period. The permit won't yet have migrated fully off the flats to the wrecks. They'll be on the wrecks, but they won't have disappeared and left the wrecks. So you've got the permit, they're in position. The tarpon are probably at their peak now. May used to be the peak in the Keys, but now I honestly think it's June is the hot month for the tarpon. And the bonefish are there as well. Now the tricky thing is, as the water warms up, and this applies for anywhere, not just the Keys, the bonefish will move off the flats. They don't like, you know, the really, really hot temperatures there. So out of the 3, the bonefish, ironically as it sounds, might be the tricky one. So here's how I do it. You've got to catch them really in the daytime. That's how they say the Grand Slam, but the technical one is within a 24-hour period. So I find that can work in your favour. The first thing I would do dawn for the bonefish. The reason for that being they've had all night to settle down. They're going to be feeding on, you'd find somewhere they're feeding on a flood tide, so they're confident, they're hungry, but more important, there's a lot of boats running around in Florida. You don't get the boat traffic. So first thing dawn would be my absolute prime time to get the bonefish one out of the way. That would take you through till, say, 11 o'clock in the morning. You could go back, you could have a coffee, you could take your time, or you could just go out fishing for the next one. The next one I would do, I go to one of the wrecks, say out of sight of Alligator Light, in front of Bud and Mary's, where you know they're there. They're always there every year, these permit. And I would target them in midday when the sun is overhead. If you're on holiday there, you've got no choice of the weather. You can't pick the weather, but this is how it should be done. And you do your sight casting for the permit, say between the hours of about 11 and 3 in the afternoon. After 3, the sun's starting to go round, and your skipper, as good as he is going to get a bit of flare and glare on the surface. He's not going to be able to spot those takes. You'll be sort of touch ledgering or feeling the line for the take, and then you might have to add a jig. In other words, you take the hook off and you tie a jig on that's got a hook integrated in the lead. So it's sinking it, and that really gets it down deeper, but it keeps you in contact, you know, with your crab bait. So you've got, let's assume you hook up, you might need, let me say, 3 permit hooked up to get one. because, they know that wreck's there. A lot of them have been hooked and released before. So when you get the permit hooked up, he's going to sound straight into that wreck. So you may lose the odd fish, but don't forget, it's in the middle of the afternoon, 3 or 4 hours, quite a long time. Then you come back in, you got 2 out of the 3. The sort of easiest option, but almost the hardest, riskiest one will be the tarpon. Well, I wouldn't even waste my time fishing for them during the daytime. You do bonefish at dawn, you do permit during the highest elevation of the sun. And obviously, the tarpon's a night feeder. You're going to fish for them at night. So I would start fishing quite early, about 6, wherever your guide thought was best for tidal conditions. And then you got all the way through to midnight to catch. 2 baits I'd take. I wouldn't take the live mullet. I know they catch on live mullet. You also lose a lot. It's quite a big bait. So I wouldn't use that. I'd use crab and I'd use pinfish. Flowfish of no more than about 6 feet on 100-pound mono leaders. Owner hooks. Light drags, as I've told you, to let them start running and then ease the drag up to pull the hook in during the fight. And I honestly think you get your tarpon. Maybe you'd lose 1, maybe you'd lose 2, maybe you'd lose 3. You'd have to be unlucky, to lose 3 on a good biting evening between, say, 6 hours. That's from 6 till 12. Personally, I think you could get lucky and get it all over and done with by about 8 o'clock. But, that's the Grand Slam. That's if you want it. But that would be my way of doing it, certainly.
Earlier you mentioned other types of slam, and with that in mind you recently recorded an interview for Audio Angling with Zyg Gregorek, owner of the Cornish Specimen Course Fishery Anglers Paradise, who according to an IGFA press release has completed the ultimate Grand Slam by becoming the first angler in history to take 3 Royal Slams, these being for all 9 species of billfish, all 8 species of tuna, and the IGFA's 9 specified sharks, which fits very nicely into what we've just been talking about here. So it's over to you and Zyg.
Everybody would know, say, there's marlin. They know it's a fish with a long, pointy bill, but, you have white marlin, blue marlin, both Atlantic and Pacific, 2 different species of sailfish, Atlantic and Pacific, and you've got the broad-bill swordfish. So, especially things like the spearfish and the swordfish, quite a few people will have caught, say, 2, maybe 3 species of marlin. But not many is going to pick up those extra ones that's going to get you the actual, what they call either the Grand Slam or basically a slam is what a species of fish. So what's the first one you can get in a day? Explain some of the slams for the people.
There's several. All slams are something worthy to aim for. You've got the Grand Slam where you have a lucky day and you can catch up through 3 different species of marlin or tuna or shark in a day. My daughter seems to have picked up some of my luck. Last year in Kenya, she caught her first marlin, etc. Then she went out again with her husband, and they went out on their own in a boat. Absolutely unbelievable. I think it was Steger, skipper was Steve. First marlin was a black, second marlin was a stripy, and third one was a sailfish. So she
in one day too.
In one day. So she achieved something which I haven't as yet, and God willing, she sort of will follow in some of my footsteps and everything else as well.
So now you've done it just not once, you've actually done the Billfish Royal Slam twice. You've completed that one right through with spearfish and swordfish. Now, only recently, we're looking at this last September 2010, you picked a fish up in Mauritius. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, well, just sort of going back a bit, after I did the Royal Slam of Over Marlin, I thought to myself, what is my next challenge? In between while I was having that challenge, I had another one. I wanted to be the first one to catch 3 different species of shark over 1,000. We'll come back to that later. There's so many things. We haven't got enough time to finish everything here. But anyway, I thought to myself, while I was fishing for the marlin, I was catching all different tunas and all different sharks. Looking at the Royal Slam for those, I only needed 1 more shark and 2 different tuna in order to do the Royal Slams of all of those. When I first went for it, it was quite exciting because nobody had yet done the Royal Shark Slam or the Royal Tuna Slam. In the process of going for the Tuna Slam, Shark Slam, I went to Boston Green Harbour. The crew were nice. The skipper, unfortunately, what he said and what he did were 2 different things. Yep. You do get that sometimes. I said, my main objective is to go for thresher shark. Have you caught them? Oh, yes, stay here. Yeah, no problem. Come along. Yeah, guarantee you'll catch them. So I thought, yes, I'll go there. But the other reason I went there they also had tuna at that time, and I wanted to catch a northern bluefin, which meant I only had one tuna left to go, same as one shark.
Yes.
So off we went. I quickly realized that it was more words than mouth, because threshers, although they've got very, very big tails, they've got very small mouths, even the very big ones, and it's smaller baits, etc., as opposed to big ones like great white or tiger, where you use 10, 15, 20-pound fish. You've got to use very small ones, slightly different techniques. So I quickly spend a couple of days. You quickly realize, whenever I go fishing abroad, you respect the wisdom of the crew and the skipper, because they've been there. That's their livelihood. Irrespective of what you think you know, they know more. However, having travelled around the world, I can quickly see if they know what they're talking about on some of the species and some of the things, or they just... and this is what annoys me with some skippers. They think you know nothing.
They tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah,
so that's
right.
What they're doing.
And then ignore you. I quickly realised it's not happening. I said, right, change tactics, because there was a storm brewing. And we didn't fish for 5 days. Let's go for there's some giant tuna. We went for tuna. I managed to catch a couple. So my northern bluefin, which now meant I was 2 steps from heaven. It's only 1 step on each side. Only 1 tuna and one shark. We went shark fishing in San Diego, where I came across another skipper, where we remained friends. I made him actually an honorary 5 Seas member. We made somebody from, Boston, Massachusetts one as well. He wants to wear the 5 Seas t-shirt. Well, you've got to be initiated. So we got some weed, ice down their pants, threw them in the sea, and quite good. So I've initiated quite a few people, made them honorary members all over the world. So the crew was quite good. I wouldn't mind going back with them. Went to San Diego, got on very well, but unfortunately didn't have... That's why I caught a small great white on the last one.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Quite nice. We had some Mako, and he was quite pleased. He said it was the first great white they've had for about 10 years.
But you are lucky then, Zyg. No question.
But the whole point is he was excited about great white. They're catching tuna threshers all the time.
Yeah.
I just want to thresh up.
I can see, yeah.
So anyway, it didn't happen. And then I thought, right, only one more tuna to go. Where shall I go? So I did some research, ended up going to Tasmania, which is a lovely place. It's oldie world. It reminds me of the West Country. Every place is called Launceston, Holsworthy, Exeter, and it is rather primitive, which is nice, like the West Country, not primitive, but oldie worldy, still hasn't been spoiled by high-rise apartments and all these great centres. And the first day we went out there, one to the sea, one to this, got it. And then I ended up with my biggest ever tuna, just below 200 pounds. Was quite nice, fantastic.
This is a southern bluefin, because obviously that's going to be a tough one to get, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, everything is tough till you've caught it. Once you've caught it, I mean, like my black marlin, I couldn't catch one. Took me years and years. I finally got it in, as I said, Bazaruto. When I went to the Cairns, Australia, I had half a dozen when I was going for some,
I see, it's the way it goes when you're looking for something else.
Yeah. So, but that was wonderful. I became the first person to catch all the tuna species of the world. Until then, nobody has done it. Since then, 1 or 2 have. And it was fantastic. I think we had the Times, the Telegraph, all the heavy newspapers, and we had quite a lot on everything else, the radio.
Now, you must be one of the few people, certainly the only people in Britain, there can't be many people in the world that have got all 3 of these certificates, the billfish, the tuna, and the shark. I mean, the governing body, so people know, is the IGFA, the International Game Fish Association, and they govern all the world records and certification. But, do they tell you whether or not there's you're one of the few people, if the only person to get all 3 of those certificates?
I've had some nice descriptions, I'm not going to where I've been described in glowing terms, so I'll leave it at that. Luck has got a lot to do with it, but at the end of the day, as we all know, you help to make your own luck. You don't get your luck thinking about it, lying in bed, whatever. I have travelled the world. I have taken risk. It has cost me a fortune. But at the end of the day, Angler's Paradise has helped me. But it's like going to conventions and going to publicity or whatever, because every time I go out, I've been fortunate enough. It ended up in the press. It ended up in this. And it does
one's helped the other, really.
Yeah. And this is why I waited such a long time. But once you do it, I wanted, as I said, to do all 3. So I did the tuna. We then did the shark, which is absolutely fantastic. And then after that, it only came it came about partly by accident, actually. I was reading sort of the newsletter from the IGFA sort of saying, oh, somebody has had the marlin slammed 2 times, 3 times, whatever. Oh, so you can do it more than once. Right, let me have a look now. I only needed 1 more fish to do my billfish royal slam twice, and there was a swordfish. I only had 1 of those. All the other species had 3, 4, 5, a dozen or whatever.
Of each,
Yep. So I thought, right, the swordfish can be one of the hardest because, well, all the species you have to target them, really. You have to fish at night.
Yeah.
It's deeper water, and it's a completely different thing. The first one I caught was from Kenya, actually. I used to live there. That was some time ago. That was targeted when I was going for the Royal Slam. And then I tried several other places. We tried in Kenya last year when my daughter... this year, actually.
Yeah. February this year, wasn't it?
Yeah,
February,
yeah.
I remember, yeah.
Had a hit, but didn't catch one.
Yeah.
Then I thought I'd go to Mauritius. It was my wife's 60th birthday. I tried persuading her to go to other places because at that particular time, September, fishing-wise, is probably not the best time for my type of species, because my other target now is to break the world record of species over 1,000 pounds.
Yes.
I hold the shark record with 3 different species.
Yeah.
The world record of species is 4. So the next fish I catch, I'll equal the world record. And if it's a shark, I'll break a world record and equal a world record. So the objective was to go for big fish. Try that, was the wrong time.
So what, just mention on these, I'm just looking at the certificate Zyg has got here. Just tell us about those 3 different big sharks you got, because the certification's here from the IGFA by Michael Leach. It's all authentic. It's a great white of 1,300, a tiger of 1,100 or plus, and a 6 skill of 13. Just tell the listeners exactly a little bit of a story on one of each of those sharks. Finish us off.
Well, sharks, I love all fishing. I mean, in England, around here, the first big fish I caught were blues and things like that. You go out there and it's fantastic. The fish that pulls lines off you and is in control till you learn how to take control. I've always wanted fish of over 1,000 pounds. I'm still dreaming of a marlin over 1,000 pounds. I think I may have had one, but it wasn't landed. It wasn't measured properly, so I can't claim it. And I heard you can get the great white in Struce Bay in South Africa. I managed to sort it out, find out how to get there. I used some friends of mine, and off we went. It was wonderful. It was measured. And the interesting thing of that one, it was caught only a week before by another Englishman from Foster's. He was there, he goes round all over the place, and he was quite proud. Oh, I caught a 1,000 pound fish, 1,300, blah, blah, blah. So we had a little bit of banter. Then when they brought it in, it had already been tagged, because at that time, they were nearly stopping great whites being caught.
Fish by sight, yes.
You can just...
tag only, wouldn't it?
Tag only.
Yes, I remember that,
so the skipper was so pleased because the first fish he ever had come in tagged was with me.
Oh,
so
really?
that's even
So
another.
you got a shark that somebody else had tagged.
But it only caught
First
a week
time ever.
before. So what you do with the line? I've got the wire trace over there. You can see it. It's a hook, massive. They cut the wire and leave it in the thing. And by the time we brought it in, it had rusted off. There was no damage, no nothing, and it took another hook. And that one was my first 1,000 pound fish. Since then I've had several sharks of 1,000 pounds. When going in Ascension, I was one of the pioneers there. We're going for marlin. We've had them to about 800, all sorts of different things. There were 6 gill sharks, and I've caught them to well over 1,300. The current record holder was on a fish I was on, and when we released mine, he said your fish was bigger than the current world record.
Yes.
But that was released, no problem. I've caught them now to, I think, 2,000 pounds. I was going to bring that in, but unfortunately the crane was broken. That one had been 2,000. So the 6 gill was caught. 6 gills, I believe you've caught them.
Yes, caught the 6 gills, Zyg, yeah. Deep water fish, yeah.
Very deep water.
Hard
it takes
work.
a long time. It is hard work, but it's more of a tug of war as opposed to some of the others. But depending what line. If you're using 130, basically, if you've got a fighting chair, it takes you half an hour to an hour because it's about 500-600 feet down. Yeah. So it's more of a tug of war, but the fish is bloody ugly. Have you seen them?
They're
massive.
big. They're big too, aren't they, when you get them at the side of the road. And you got a tiger shark there as well. Where did you go for that?
That was with Michael Leach. He was then the sort of IGFA president. I remember, this is where I'm lucky, I meet friends and contacts all over the place, and he suggested, if I'm going to Australia, he knew that I already had 2 sharks over 1,000 pounds. He says, there's a good chance of catching a tiger. If you catch one of those, you will then, how shall I say, be the first person in the world to catch 3 different species. So that's what we did. We went out there.
Where did you go from in Australia?
Cairns.
Oh, from Cairns.
Yeah.
So you weren't interested in the black marlin there?
I went both. I got a black marlin, and what they said, this is what they told me. He said, if you want to catch a tiger, what you then do is catch a marlin and chum with a marlin, and that'll bring it in. And that's what we ended up doing, and that's how I caught it.
And that's how you got it, yeah. And did you see it in the water before it took, or did it take down deep?
This was the last day. I'd given up hope. I've had about half a dozen sharks which we sort of brought in, measured and put them back, because I wanted to claim it. I wanted to be 100% certain it was whatever. And all of them were about 700, 800, using the formula, length.
Weight for length and that, yeah.
Oh, well, we're using the Australian formula. They're just going for the length. But the formula the IGFA accept is length and girth.
Yes.
And this is now the last day. It's gone midnight. I've run out of my supplies. No, I took some Drambuie and some whiskies, and because I like sort of Irish coffee or whatever at night because you're sleeping on the boat, you're hundreds of miles out.
Yes.
And I said, right, well, this is it. We might just well drift. We couldn't drift before at night because the seas were a bit rough. This was the first time. So they all went to sleep and we're just drifting along. All of a sudden, the line went like that, and I thought, oh, bloody hell. Jumped in the chair, picked it up, put the ratchet on, boom. And the tigers, of all the fish I've caught, I haven't caught makos very big, only just over 100. And they're supposed to be some of the best fighters. The great whites are quite good. But the tigers, of all the sharks, I think are some of the best. They go up, bring them up, and they say, sod you, boom, they go down, and down. After about 3rd or 4th time, because all the other ones were around about 700, 800. After the 4th time, 5th time, you bring it in. After the 10th time with this one, I was actually, my arms were hurting.
You nearly had enough.
I was almost beginning to think, oh, sod it, do I have to? And then it was the middle of the night, so they can't see what's happening. So after time, the shark is coming into the boat.
Yes.
So they had to suddenly go forward so it doesn't get caught in the propellers, doesn't get underneath. And I'm saying, don't do that because it takes all the line out. And I'm calling them, and they're calling me a whinging pom. Anyway, we got it in. It was awesome sight. I got pictures of that. It's absolutely unbelievable. So it's fantastic. I was very, very happy.
So now your target to finish off for the 4 over the 1,000 is going to be a blue marlin, black marlin. What's going to be your easiest shot? Well, it's not. None of them are going to be easy.
None of them's going to be easy because
what's going to be your target?
The ones that I'd like to try are blue marlin, black marlin. There's always a chance which I'll try. Shark-wise, these are there, but very rare. Threshers, mako. The other one, which I'm trying to find out, is a Greenland shark.
Oh, I've heard about those.
They're similar to the 6-gill, but I'm trying to find out somewhere or other, a boat or whatever. I've tried with Greenland or Iceland, and yes, we can do it for you, sir. Yeah, all right, I'm interested. Or you can hire the whole trawler, £10,000 per day.
Really? Yeah, there's a limit to everything.
Instead of 500 or something. Oh, God. So I'm still looking at. But there are several different sharks. I like the hammerhead can go. But this will be more, it's difficult to target them, but as long as you're out there, there's always a chance. I mean, part of fishing, when I mentioned my first marlin took me an hour and a half to get in. Last year I was lucky enough to 5 marlin, 4 were over 500, 600 or more pounds, even 700. The longest one of those took me to get in was less than half an hour.
Oh, really?
Because once you know what you're doing, your technique, the boat is helping, they're going backwards, bringing, what you can wind line in, etc. The first time, all I did is sort of didn't use my body as such, I just used my arms.
And everything wears out. Yeah.
But so it's still, so although I haven't got all my strength as I had many years ago, I've got more wisdom.
That's true.
That's my story.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got an incredible set of statistics here anyway, Zyg. And I'm sure we're going to see some other records go, and it won't be just yours. I think here at Anglers Paradise, you've got some big catfish. What size do you reckon they'll come in future years? What's your honest opinion you think they're going to go to here?
I think from what I know, and you can check the records, the biggest that have been authenticated coming in small and growing on are here. We've had them to over 60, and this is when they've been put in at only about 6-8 inches. There are a lot of cats bigger than that. But the history may be suspect, this one just suddenly turned up or whatever.
They suddenly appear from stockings, yeah.
This one here, I've got the permission, I've got this, they've grown. I'm hoping to get them to over 100. Although they have been caught over 100, I don't think anybody can claim that in the same level.
Same level from the beginning.
From the beginning. So those are there. I know we've got the biggest golden tension, golden off. For whatever reason, they haven't been claimed at the right time. Nobody's up there. I'm very pleased and proud of those. Carp-wise, we're still waiting for our first 40. I will get it in Nirvana, one of our day ticket lakes. The reason we haven't at Anglers Paradise, what I provide at Anglers Paradise is a paradise for your average angler, a family man. We can bring him. You've got your swimming pool. We've got lovely accommodations, a licensed bar, play area. Family can enjoy. He can have a holiday and he can enjoy his fishing. And in order to enjoy your fishing, you've got to be able to catch. If you're not catching, it's pointless.
From the point of view of a fishing man, yeah.
Yeah. So this is why, as a specimen hunter, I'm not prepared to blank. I hate blanking.
Yes.
But I do it on a regular basis because if you want to catch big fish,
you've got to wait.
You've got to wait. So I've deliberately, like the specimen lake has got over 30 20s and 30s in there. The main carp lake's got over 100 20s in there. So your man has got a good chance.
So you're going to get a big fish. Maybe get his personal best as well. So.
And he can enjoy himself. The family can enjoy himself. There's so much leisure to see kids catching their first fish here. Since we've been going for 20 years, I've had some of these kids come along with mum and dad, and they've now come back with their own family.
Oh, that's good. That's interesting.
From what's been said then, the type of slam you achieve can also depend to no small degree on a grand slam of non-angling inputs, these being plenty of money, plenty of free time, and the one you can't buy, which is plenty of luck. My thanks then to Graeme and Zyg for pointing us in the right direction here, even if it is a road that few of us will unfortunately ever get to travel.